All right, people, we finished with House of the Dragon and The Boy, so now we are wrapping up this weekend with the next great blockbuster installment of this illustrious summer, of this illustrious movie year, Twisters, plural, the movie, which is a continuation, sort of the 1996 action classic directed by Jan de Bont and starring Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt and Philip Seymour Hoffman and Carrie Elwes and a bunch of other character actors in a 90s blockbuster movie. This time we've got a real movie star vehicle starring the one and only, the Glenster himself, Glenn Powell, who is Hollywood's latest anointed golden boy. I don't know about you, Luke, but I'm still really worried because I'm still getting flashbacks every time I hear the word Hollywood's new golden boy to when they tried to do that with Sam Worthington and Taylor Kitsch in the beginning of the 2010s. Remember how that worked out so well for those two?
I don't, Dom. I was 10 years old, Dom.
Exactly. Proving my point here, exactly, is why I am skeptical, to say the least, about Hollywood's continued choice to pursue movies like this. All of that and more on today's episode of the Talkin TV podcast. Stay tuned. All right, Luke. So, needless to say, this was another movie that you were very much looking forward to. You know, Twisters. It featured a lot of really cool, spectacular action. The trailer, I will say that, did show off a lot of really interesting effects as far as how they were utilizing the Twisters in person. And despite, obviously, the connections to the 90s classic, it doesn't necessarily, there's no references to it. You don't need to have seen it in order to really know what's going on going in. So you could...
No one is anyone's son or daughter.
No, they only get one quick insert, and it's a blinker you'll miss it cameo if you recognize them to begin with. So thankfully, at the very least, this is another summer blockbuster that, despite its dependence on the IP, does not require you to have seen the IP. And what I will say is that, for my money, I definitely think that this will strike well with the people who go to see it. I think that it will just be a nice, fun, get out of the house, enjoyable time at the movies. There's nothing inherently problematic or bad about it. The acting, for the most part, is all good. It's simple enough. That being said, I don't necessarily know if this is a movie that's made for me, but I want to hear your thoughts first. Do you think that this will be a movie that will actually, I guess just, I'm confused as far as, I don't really see, the traction as far as, what is it about this movie that's going to get people to come and see it?
I think you hit the nail on the head, the simplicity of it. It's tornadoes, people chasing tornadoes, American propaganda. A lot of people can get behind that. Someone said Top Gun was military propaganda. This is American propaganda. I'm moving to Oklahoma next week. But no, it's the simplicity of it. It's for all ages. Take your family, take your friends, take your date, whatever. And it's a lot of fun. Very, very charismatic cast. Glenn Powell, as we mentioned, on the rise. I think he's here to stay, unlike the ones you mentioned. Every week he's casting something. Daisy Edgar Jones is another perfect lead for this. And just the action of it. It's got that Top Gun tinge to it. You know, Joe Kosinski doing the story. It's got that summer feel to it. It's a summer movie, basically.
It feels like a summer movie. I'll give it that much. It's probably, of all the movies that I've seen so far this year, this is the first one that feels like a summer movie. And honestly, it's funny because I've been racking my brain this summer trying to figure out, what is it about this summer season that feels so differently? Because, I haven't hated a majority of the movies that we've gotten this summer, but, none of them feel like summer movies. And I think this is the first one that really does, honestly. You know, we're coming off of two horror movies that came out last weekend. Quiet Place, which was, it's a quiet place. It's a dystopian future horror movie set in New York. Kinds of Kindness, which is an art house movie. And then the trifecta in May, Fall Guy, Apes, and Furiosa, but none of which really felt like none of these movies really feel like the fun summer blockbuster that we kind of are promised, And I think
the Fall Guy was the
Fall Guy's probably
if it came out later.
Yes. If
Yeah.
the like I said, we've talked about this, that the Fall Guy, the biggest thing that screwed that was its release date, because if that's a March release or a July release, that fits perfectly for that movie. But I think the opening movie of the summer, I think, is what kind, for whatever reason, it just, there was something about that just didn't work for people. I'm still working on why that is. If it's just, they've just become so accustomed to that release date spot being a Marvel movie, and this year it just wasn't. But whatever the case may be, it just, that didn't work for that one. This movie, on the other hand, the other really interesting thing about this, as far as kind of what weirdly does but also doesn't make it like function quite possibly as a summer blockbuster, is it's directed by Lee Isaac Chung, who, if people remember, kind of broke out in 2020, ironically enough, with his movie Minari, which was critically beloved, even though it was seen by all of about 5 people because it was released in 2020, and got a bunch of Oscar nominations, including an Oscar win for the grandma in that movie, Yao Yun-jun. And he went on to direct an episode of The Mandalorian in season 3. He also went on to direct, I believe he's also directing an episode of Skeleton Crew, the Star Wars show that's coming out at Christmas this year. So he got his training in the summer blockbuster feeling. And I guess kind of what's so interesting about this is that, like, I'm like, oh, wow. For the first time, it feels like we have a director who actually knows what he's doing with a big budget. Like, the camera is not like super wonky and junky. Like, it feels well paced. The dialogue doesn't feel super stock. It doesn't feel like it's constantly setting us up for terrible, lame jokes, you know? And it actually feels like it has some substance. The characters actually feel lived in and well fleshed out. And I'm like, weirdly enough, like, I do, even though I was looking actively for parts to not like this movie, because there were a ton of tropes here that I'm like, oh, okay, seen that before. Okay, seen that before. You know, like the David Corn Sweat character, I'm like, okay, he's going to be the generic villain. But the movie doesn't even really seem to care that much at the end. They're literally just like, okay, we're just going to drop him off in the middle of a field as the tornado to end all tornadoes is coming this way, you know? Like,
He's Superman. He'll be fine.
do we care about what happens? No, not really at all.
I just do want to say it's a very small sample. It's a different role, but he's gonna be a great Superman. Just like, even just seeing this,
Yes.
like,
No, I was confident that he was going to be a good Superman when I saw him in Hollywood all the way back in 2020. But I also did recently just watch Pearl, and I saw him in that, and he was very good in that as well. So I'm excited to see him regardless. But I guess just for me, the thing that really stuck out as far as this actually being like a summer blockbuster that strived to be more than just mindless, dumb entertainment is the fact that every chance it gets, the movie does go out of its way to show that, like, the main characters are not just daredevils. They are genuinely trying to help people in middle America, which is, as we've talked about both on this podcast and in real life, is a section of the country that is drastically underserved and kind of overlooked by everybody. And the fact that this is a movie that's really putting a big emphasis on that, I think, is kind of really nice. Not to mention the fact that it shows that, like, the main characters are trying to do some good, because this is an area of the country that it shows it's like, okay, like, we're not just doing this, you know, just for shits and giggles, you know, like, these things are actually really dangerous towards people and can really uproot people's lives and really, you know, cause disasters for them. And if we have a chance to make a difference there, you know, we should take that offer. We should take that opportunity. And I do kind of like that. I like that it gives a little bit more substance than the typical summer blockbuster, which kind of, those were all just kind of going along the lines of Roland Emmerich and Michael Bay of, like, let's just destroy as many things as possible and just have the characters talk about how they're going to outrun the things that are destroying everything. So yeah, I don't know. What was your take on that, really?
I guess it's a more intelligent approach. Like, these characters, like you said, they're not just idiots running away. They're solving problems. Like, like, there's a scene in the barn where they go through the sciencey stuff of how to stop the tornado. I don't know how rooted in reality that might be. Like, whatever, it's good enough for me. It's good enough for a movie plot. But yeah, it feels like it's been written with some thought. The relationships between the characters, like Daisy Edgar Jones's Kate, she starts off like just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna help the military or whatever, and then she realizes, oh, maybe I forgot why I'm doing this in the first place, and then it's like I think it's like a bit of a rom-com in disguise.
It absolutely 100% is a rom-com in disguise, but it's also got, again, it's doing, I feel like, what American blockbusters are trying to do now, which is that because there are so few individual genres that can make it on screen, they're essentially trying to turn the blockbuster in America into, it's got a little bit of everything genre-wise. It's like we're trying to make these movies feel as big as humanly possible, and they've got a little bit of something. There's a romance in there, and there's a little bit of action, and there's a storm chaser element in there. There's a disaster element too. So it's got like a bunch of different genres that it's playing around with. I should probably say what, because I realize we've been talking about this movie for a little bit. And I should probably say what this movie is actually about, considering that, again, this, aside from one quick blinker you'll miss it insert from Bill Paxton's son, who appears in a very entertaining scene, I would say. And I would say that's probably like the only like generic Hollywood scene where they just take a blatantly unlikable character and just viciously kill them in the most brutal way possible, which is that Daisy Edgar Jones, who is the main character in the movie, portrays Kate Carter, who's working in Oklahoma, as a storm chaser, because they're attempting to test out means of taking down tornadoes by launching barrels of sodium polyacrylate in an attempt to reduce its intensity and secure funding for research. However, after an incident in the beginning of the movie in which her entire crew is killed, she retires to New York until 5 years later she's recruited by the only other surviving member of her team, Javi, portrayed by Anthony Ramos, in order to return to Oklahoma and team up with this new company in order to try and once again test out this new radar tracking technology that they've been working on. And along the way, she ends up running into Glenn Powell, Tyler Owen's character, who is a daredevil, do or don't, pulled up by his bootstraps YouTube team, along with his team, as they attempt to go in and take out tornadoes by shooting off fireworks in the middle of it. And as these two teams compete in order to see who can take down different tornadoes, they discover that, maybe they don't have that much. Maybe they have more in common than they thought, ultimately, as they eventually have to team up in order to take down one of the biggest tornadoes that anyone has ever seen. So already off the bat, I'm like, okay, they're trying to come at it from a slightly more sciencey angle. They're trying to they're trying to already show that, like, okay, this is legitimate. We're trying to do good. So and I think that of all of the different movies that like kind of have fake science, I don't know, this is the first one that felt like that this is the first one that felt like it kind of actually, the science feels legit. Like, I haven't actually had a chance since I saw this movie last night to double check and fact check the science to see if it actually is legit. But I don't know. This one felt like there was some slightly more thought put into the science aspect of it, whereas it feels like in movies of the past, they would just be like, it's just sciencey gobbledygook. Nobody's actually going to care about that stuff,
Yeah, I think another example is The Martian, where they got enough things right that they can afford to have some leeway with other things. And I think they did their best in this one. They explained very meticulously how exactly the thing works. Like, it takes the moisture out of the air or whatever, and that's how it takes it down. That was enough for me. I'm not gonna go and research about. I'm not a chemist. That's not my area. It's good enough for me. It made for great cinema, and I think that's all that matters.
So I guess my question
is, movie like this.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, could this be the final? Could this finally be turning around in terms of, will Hollywood finally actually start to employ like real science in movies and also like stop treating the audience like morons? I don't think that's going to be the case, but it would be pretty cool if they did, honestly. Especially given, but again, this is a Hollywood blockbuster. It's got to have, some romance in there ultimately. And I mean, Glenn Powell and Daisy Edgar Jones. It's funny because I actually have almost finished watching Normal People, which is the miniseries that aired in 2020 that kind of launched Daisy Edgar Jones and Paul Mescal, respectively. Paul Mescal's another one who's got another massive blockbuster coming out in November, that being Gladiator 2. Which is going to be interesting, to say the least, considering that both Ridley Scott and Michael Mann seem to be directors that just cannot seem to get away from their old legacy projects. So, now that Michael Mann is indeed confirmed to be working on the adaptation of the novel that he wrote, that is Heat 2, which is both the sequel and the prequel to the original Heat. So that's going to be interesting, to say the least. I saw Daisy in, I think the first thing I saw her in was this straight to Hulu movie that came out of Sundance back in 2022 called Fresh, which I thought was very, very good. And I thought was one of the better movies that came out that year, in which she finds herself to be having been kidnapped by a cannibal who wants to, cut off parts of her body and sell them. Did you get a chance to watch that when that
I
came out?
did. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I thought
Very
it was very good.
creepy horror movie.
Yes, very creepy, showing off
Very
the bit of
very straight to Hulu-esque.
yes.
But that's a good thing.
I don't know. I kind of would have liked to have seen it in the theater, but it was a very good movie,
Yeah.
and I like how it showed off Daisy's acting chops. I don't know. It was a little bit disconcerting hearing the Daisy Southern accent, considering that like I know that she's very clearly Irish and what's it called, or British. I can't remember which one. And so I heard like bits of the fake of the real accent coming through in between the fake accent. But her and Glenn Powell, they have good chemistry. They're good together. Honestly, Glenn Powell. I will say this:
He has chemistry with everyone.
he really does. He really does.
Hitman, anyone but you.
He's been on a roll.
Maverick, I don't know.
He has been on a roll recently, honestly, and I do ultimately see. And the thing about him too is that he's not just a pretty face; he is actually classically theatrically trained, and it shows. Honestly, like everything, like he's like after coming out of acting school, he's doing all the tricks and tropes to like, okay, this is what I need to do to be a good actor first and foremost. And he's not as concerned with being a star. Obviously, the being the star is helps, and he's having fun with it. Particularly the bit where him and Sydney Sweeney were pretending to be together in order to like amp up the promotion for Anyone But You. Clearly, that worked wonders because that was like one of the highest grossing rom-coms that has come out in theaters in a minute. So as far as Glenn Powell proving his movie stardom, I definitely think that the 3 for 3 that he's had so far, between Anyone But You, Hitman, and now this, they definitely seem to be working, honestly. And as far as his next couple of movies that are coming out, he's going to be in he's in
a couple shows too.
Well, he's going to be in I got to check. I don't see any shows upcoming, but he's going to be in the show Huntington, directed by John Patton Ford, which I believe is a Western. He's going to be in this movie. He also produced this movie, The Blue Angels. He currently is set to appear in Edgar Wright's newest adaptation of The Running Man. So it's going to be interesting. Glenn Powell's got a couple of interesting projects coming out.
There are DC rumors.
Yes, there are
following people.
Yep, there are heavy Batman rumors floating around.
I don't know about that.
Well, no, it would be funny if that did happen, considering that both him that would mean that both him and Superman are in this movie. So I think that would be pretty funny, honestly. Yeah, so I will say that again, for a movie that I had little to no expectations of going in, I have to say I was particularly surprised by not how much I enjoyed it, but I'm like, okay, that was enjoyable. I didn't completely hate every minute that I spent in this theater, which really, I mean, given the status of movies in 2024, I think that I don't know if that should be commended as the norm, but I'm hoping that things can start to get a little bit better once we get into the fall ultimately. So, there was one other thing. Oh, of course, the Joseph Kosinski thing. So, I mean, Joseph Kosinski obviously doing a do-over on the story that shows here clearly. I still don't know where I'm at with him as a director because I still think that Top Gun, unfortunately, is the most overhyped movie of the century, if I'm being quite frank. But I will say that I'm realizing that more of that is that's more so Cruise for me than the actual movie itself. Because Kosinski as a director, I really, really enjoy. He hasn't made a bad movie in my mind. I even like that Spiderhead movie that he directed that came out like a month after Top Gun. I keep forgetting that I think that was like the early June movie because I keep saying there was only 6 movies that really came out in the summer of 2022. And Spiderhead was one of the ones that kind of fell through the cracks because it was released straight to Netflix. And Kosinski was really only able to get that release off of the backing of Top Gun. But I love Tron Legacy. Only the Brave is a solid movie. I haven't seen Oblivion, but I've heard good things about that. And the F1 movie that he's doing that's coming out next year looks amazing. So, I mean, Luke, it's safe to say that Joseph Kosinski is slowly becoming one of your favorite directors. I think it's safe to say.
Oh, yeah. F1, I'm sure I will have many gripes about the story and already the dialogue is making me scratch my head, but the racing will be undeniably quick. I think the fact that he'll be able to capture the speed of those cars for the first time, because you watch them in the races, like the POV shots, they don't look that fast, and you can stick a 4K camera on there, like even better, because they already stuck one camera in a race, and they changed the color of the car in post, so that's quite interesting. But yeah, he did the story on this. I had that same feeling, so like I was leaning in for the whole movie, pretty much, which was exactly what I was doing for Top Gun. And yeah, it's just something. He just gets me. Right.
Yeah, he just understands you. He's like Michael Bay, but with class, and who actually like lets the camera just sit there and not like
Yeah.
jitter around every 5 seconds and insert a bunch of cuts and explosions and lens flares. So yeah, no, I like Kaczynski. Ultimately, like I said, I like the fact that he's a director who understands how to do visuals really well. Like I do appreciate his visual sense and his visual style. It's just he needs someone who really grasps and understands the story. And like the fact that Tron Legacy, for me personally, is still his best movie that he's done is really kind of funny. And part of that also is the Daft Punk score, score of the century, if you ask me. But yeah, no, he's definitely I think making the rounds as well. And I'm very, very excited for F1 or Apex or whatever it's going to end up being.
Should have been called Apex. F1 is such a goofy.
Yeah, I don't like the F1 title. We really got to figure out which one of these marketing firms are coming up with these titles, because this is like the fifth one now where it's like, it feels like there was a better title in there somewhere, And yeah, so I'm just really, yeah. Ultimately, at the end of the day, though, like I said, Twisters, it's weird because I talked about this on the pre-stream before we got on. It's fun. It was fine. It was enjoyable. There was nothing blatantly offensive about it. I was expecting something that was going to be a lot worse, but it was fine. But ultimately, like, I don't know. It's in the same way. It's the same spot as what I said last year, as far as this is the Mission Impossible spot, which is leading into next weekend, which is the money weekend. Because last year with next weekend was Barbenheimer, and this year it's Deadpool. So I don't know. I guess I'm still trying to figure out. I'm still trying to figure out kind of where my thoughts are on this movie. And I guess just, again, the response to it from the audience is really going to be what indicates as far as whether this is a success in my mind. Because I don't necessarily equate box office as straight being a success anymore. It really isn't. It's like, to me, a success is how much a movie stands in the public in the public mind space. And really, outside of this being just another cool installment for Glenn Powell, as far as being a disaster movie that didn't suck blatantly, or that isn't like so bad it's enjoyable. And that's the other thing about disaster movies too, is that most disaster movies are remembered because they're so bad and so corny they're kind of enjoyable. Like the late 90s, from like 96 to 99, had so many disaster movies that in hindsight are just awful movies, but they're so enjoyable because of how cheesy and how dumb fun they are. And now I feel like with their attempt to make every movie quote unquote serious, I feel like that just kind of it allows the disaster movies to lose a little bit of their luster. Like, say what you will about that last Independence Day movie that we got in 2016 and how awful that movie was, but that movie, still being directed by Roland Emmerich, still had a little bit of like kind of that dumb winking fun, self-aware fun to it, that really all those 90s blockbuster, all those 90s disaster movies had. So I guess kind of that's where I'm torn on it. Like, this is still a good movie. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, which is honestly a way higher rating than I was expecting to give it. But yeah, I don't know. I still kind of am feeling like a little bit like, what are we doing here? But I feel like that is the case with all of Hollywood right now.
Well, leading up to Twisters, I watched about 15 disaster movies I hadn't seen before to make a little video disaster movie tier list, and Twisters made it all worth it because it is a 5-star, 3-star movie. I think that's the best way you can describe it. I'm thinking you agree with me.
That's the absolute. That's it. That's exactly it. That's the best description I possibly heard of it. A 5-star, 3-star movie. That's exactly it.
And that's good enough for me. If you film cars driving through fields, that's already like enough for me to really enjoy the movie. And then you throw country music in there. You throw Glenn Powell in there.
I think this is the first movie that actually made me that actually utilized country music, and I was like, oh, this is kind of awesome. Like, for the first time ever, I don't think I've ever seen country music that makes me go, okay, yeah, let's go. Because I wasn't exactly like fist pumping, being like, fuck yeah, when that happened. But I was also like, okay, I'm kind of getting into this.
It fits.
It does fit.
That's what matters. The little Wizard of Oz references, like naming the things Lion, Tin Man, and Scarecrow. I will point out in Latvia, we have subtitles in Latvian for every movie. They translate Tin Man as firewood chopper. The whole word. And I'm like, okay, sure.
Oh man.
But I think my favorite shot in the movie is when they're in the movie theater. It's playing Frankenstein. It's the scene where it's alive. The screen tears off to reveal the tornado.
That was awesome. That was so
cinema.
Good. Yes. Oh man, the references to old cinema ultimately. Oh man, yeah, it was good. It was a fun time ultimately. So out of 5, what do you give it?
It's a big 5. I'll be championing this movie till the end of the year. If anything can challenge it for the number 2 spot, I will welcome it. But they will really have to try.
Yes, yes, indeed, they will. And with that being said, people, that is it. That is mine and Luke's review of Twisters. Like I said, be sure to tune in next week for before Deadpool and Wolverine. It's going to be a big event. It's going to be a big stacked panel. I'm trying to bring back the Madam Web panel that we had, but no promises. Also, like I said, as you guys can see, summer blockbuster season is winding down. The Boys just recently wrapped this past week, as you can listen to in this at the beginning of this episode. We've also only got 2 episodes left of House of the Dragon as we begin to wind our way down towards the fall and the end of the year. But Luke, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
They can follow me strangely actively on Luke Reviews on YouTube. There's 2 fresh videos there, one about disaster movies, one ranking the X-Men movies before we transfer over into the new continuity. My longest video yet, maybe too long. I go on a James Bond tangent in the Dark Phoenix segment, which is certainly something, but yeah, there.
Absolutely. I can't wait to watch those videos myself. And as always, people, at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, at Official Talkin TV Podcast across all platforms. This episode will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as soon as this episode is finished and I have finished editing it. And as always, people, 12 seasons of a short film and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next weekend for Deadpool and Wolverine.